The 2021 NFL regular season is officially over. It's absolutely crazy that we've gotten to this point, but at this point now, I would like to discuss and talk about a few names that you could find on your Dynasty waiver wires if you are still doing waiver wire runs and stuff for the end of the year. So these are a couple of names that I think could be on your waiver wire list that you guys need to go out and grab for the 2022 offseason. So let's get right into this video. So as I say every week, and for the final time this year, I do pull actual data and rostership percentages from real Dynasty leagues run through myfantasyleague.com on safe leagues. So any rostership data or percentages that I reference in this video are from that data set of over 600 real Dynasty leagues. First and foremost, let me run through a handful of names that are probably already rostered in your Dynasty leagues, but just in case if they were dropped due to cuts or anything else like that, and they are available on your waiver wire, you need to go out and grab these guys for the offseason. And that includes Mitch Trubisky, Tyler Huntley, Marcus Mariota, all quarterbacks, backup quarterbacks who could potentially have a starting role in 2022. Deonta Foreman, Keyshawn Vaughn, Gus Edwards, the running backs who could potentially see a value uptick or be really good handcuffs for 2022. And then a bunch of wide receivers in Sterling Shepard, Tyler Johnson, Josh Reynolds, James Washington, and KJ Osborne. All these wide receivers who could potentially be on your waiver wire, who could see an uptick in 2022, either through their free agencies or teammates' free agencies. So let's get into it, because I have three names that I think could be available on your guys' Dynasty waiver wires right now that you need to pick up for the 2022 offseason. And the first one we're going to talk about is Rex Burkhead, running back for the Houston Texans, who is still available in almost 20% of the Dynasty leagues that I'm pulling from, which was a surprising percentage to me, considering how much volume Rex Burkhead has been getting since basically the last half of the year. He's been averaging 17.1 touches per game since week 11. And while that volume didn't translate to a lot of actual production or fantasy points for the majority of the time that he was getting it outside of the past couple of weeks in the championship in week 17, he is currently actually the only running back signed for the Houston Texans in 22. He actually just signed a contract extension in the past couple of days that puts him as the only running back on the team for 2022. And that contract was prioritized over guys like David Johnson and Royce Freeman, who the Texans have already. Now, it's possible that both those players sign sometime in the spring to stay with the Houston Texans. And I definitely think that these guys are going to go out and get an actual running back. They're not going to go into the 2022 season with just Rex Burkhead. But what I do think could potentially happen is Rex Burkhead was signed to this team as a veteran presence to continue being kind of a bridge running back for this team, as a position that they don't necessarily really need to emphasize or prioritize this offseason, given all the other weaknesses and holes that this team has. They can prioritize other free agent signings, other draft day signings, and as long as Rex Burkhead survives the spring and the summer without a major free agent running back signing, even if it's like Melvin Gordon or Ronald Jones, if he survives without any of them coming to the team or any significant rookie being drafted to the team, probably on day 1 or day 2, I think both those are kind of unlikely for the Texans. If he does all of that and survives this offseason, kind of like Myles Gaskin did last year, Rex Burkhead could be pretty valuable for your dynasty teams as a depth piece at your running back position that you could just plug in and play for injuries or bye weeks or anything like that, that you could grab off the waiver wire right now, or let alone potentially grabbing him off the waiver wire now and then just flipping him for like a second round pick or a couple thirds. Like, that's free money off the waiver wire that you're getting in Rex Burkhead. So I definitely think that if he is still available out there, definitely go out and grab him for the 2022 offseason, because he could be a player that just sneaks through and survives and ends up being pretty solid for dynasty or for fantasy in a production standpoint, but also could just maintain a little bit of value that you can cash out on later in the year. The next player I want to talk about is Cedrick Wilson, wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys, who actually, in my opinion, is a pretty good NFL wide receiver and is super interesting to me for dynasty. Similar to Rex Burkhead, he is available in a little bit over of 20% of the dynasty leagues that I am pulling from. So still a pretty significant amount of dynasty leagues out there that he is available in. And Cedrick Wilson is really interesting because he was basically the wide receiver 4 on the Dallas Cowboys all year long, or at least came into the year as such, behind Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Gallup. But then he kind of had those weeks where Michael Gallup had his injury at the beginning of the year and missed a good amount of the middle part of the season, and then came back and then actually tore his ACL, unfortunately, again. But then also CeeDee Lamb had time where he missed. Amari Cooper had time where he missed. And remember, on Thanksgiving, Cedrick Wilson had a pretty solid day as the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 for the Dallas Cowboys, and had a couple of stretches where he was startable and a really good flex option for you as the wide receiver 1 or 2 on the Dallas Cowboys. And Wilson did basically that exact same thing again in week 18 in a game that was still largely played by Dak Prescott, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb, where Wilson was the wide receiver 3. He caught 5 passes for 119 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Philadelphia Eagles this past week, and finished second on the team in targets behind Amari Cooper. So he definitely could have value in this Cowboys offense as the wide receiver 3 on this team. So remember, Michael Gallup is a free agent. I actually expect Michael Gallup to sign elsewhere outside of the Dallas Cowboys organization, which could give Cedrick Wilson that bump to wide receiver 3 status. And then you have next year, if CeeDee Lamb misses a game or Amari Cooper misses a game, it's very easy for him to have a solid trajectory on how he could be fantasy and dynasty relevant for us in the 2022 offseason and beyond. I would also like to mention that Cedrick Wilson himself is a restricted free agent, but I do expect him to stay with the Dallas Cowboys for depth and given how he's performed for them in the past. So I do expect him to be tendered and stay on the Dallas Cowboys. But there is that potential chance that he is on a new team next year, which any team that actually goes out and puts in a bid on his tender means that they probably actually want to use him as well. And it would kind of be a lateral situation for Cedrick Wilson, in my opinion, as the wide receiver 2 or 3 on a different team, though not as good of an offense or probably not as good of a quarterback as Dak Prescott. But the upside is there for Cedrick Wilson. If you can go out and grab him off your waiver wire now for the 2022 season, I think he's a fantastic pickup right now from your waiver wires, just to have some added depth at the wide receiver position, similar to Rex Burkhead at the running back position, where you can either flip him or actually use him in 2022. And the last player I want to talk about is Laquon Treadwell, wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who we could potentially see, that normal 7th year breakout for a former first round wide receiver in 2022 in Laquon Treadwell. Probably not, but it's kind of fun to think about. Because actually, surprisingly, from week 12 on, Laquon Treadwell was actually pretty good for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was on a 17-game pace of 106 targets, 75 receptions, and 1,000 receiving yards over the last 7 games of the season, averaging over 11 fantasy points per game. He became a legit target for Trevor Lawrence after Jamal Agnew went down, after DJ Chark went down. He was an actual real threat and receiver on the opposite side of Marvin Jones, with him, Marvin Jones, and Laviska Shenault. Treadwell is also interesting too, kind of like Cedrick Wilson, where he is also a free agent, but I expect him to probably be back in Jacksonville just because the market for Laquon Treadwell, I don't think is really going to be there from other teams. And Jacksonville just could easily re-sign him for a cheap contract for like 1 year for $1, $2, $3 million and just have some additional depth piece, especially with the fact that DJ Chark himself is a free agent, and I don't expect DJ Chark to be back in Jacksonville and for him to have a good market from other teams and sign elsewhere outside of the Jaguars organization. So it is possible that we see next year this Jaguars team, if they don't add any significant wide receiver pieces, because they themselves have a lot of holes to fix as well, even with Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne and James Robinson coming back from injury, they have a lot of other holes to address on this team that they don't necessarily need to prioritize a wide receiver in free agency or the draft. So it's possible that we see next year it's Marvin Jones, Laquon Treadwell, and Laviska Shenault again, like what we saw at the end of the year, in which case you could actually be a solid starter for you in a flex position, or again, injuries, bye weeks, all that extra stuff, as a solid wide receiver depth piece that you can get off of your waiver wire right now. And in fact, actually more available than both Cedrick Wilson and Rex Burkhead. He's only rostered in 65% of Dynasty leagues. So he's available out there in 35% of the Dynasty leagues that I'm pulling from, which is pretty significant in my opinion. So if Laquon Treadwell is out there, I would definitely go out and stash him and see how his offseason plays out for 2022, because he could be another player that sees an uptick in value for 2022 based on how the offseason goes, and could be valuable for your Dynasty leagues, either again for production or to cash out for a couple of draft picks at the end of your rookie drafts. And then I would like to mention just 3 really quick deep stashes. These guys are not rostered in basically any leagues. If they are, it's like 5-10% of Dynasty leagues that I'm pulling from, which is only like 50-60 leagues anyway. So these guys are largely available, and if you're in a really super deep league, I'm talking 30-35 man or more roster spots, you guys could definitely check out and see if these guys are available if you want to stash them. So I'm talking about Elijah Penny, running back for the New York Giants, Lil Jordan Humphrey, wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints, and Noah Brown, wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys. I think those 3 players are super interesting if you're in super deep rosters and need an extra stash and you have an extra player and have an extra roster spot to fit one of those players on. I definitely think those 3 guys would be the priority for me if they are available in my league. So those are all the players that I would look to pick up off of the Dynasty waiver wire and see if any of these guys are available to hold through the 2022 offseason, just to see how this offseason plays out for those players, because they could see a potential uptick in their value. And as I mentioned, you could actually use them for production in 2022 if that uptick in value is good enough to warrant that, or you could cash out for some draft picks or maybe future seconds or thirds or anything like that. Just free money off of the Dynasty waiver wire is always super important to have. And if you would like to watch a breakdown of consensus running back rankings and Dynasty tiers at the running back position, you can click on this video and watch that. And if that'll being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching. We'll catch y'all later.